Hi, I'm Anne Reynolds. I work for Cornwall Council's Strategic Historic Environment team. We do policy, strategy, information and advice to internal, external partners all around Cornwall on the heritage that we have in Cornwall, how to look after it, helping with grants, helping interpretation and things like that. So we're a partner organisation with the Monumental Improvement project, lottery project, and also obviously with the Cornwall Protected Landscapes team as well, which we work really, really closely with because we all do such great work and outputs for heritage in Cornwall. So it was really, really exciting to be able to have this opportunity to work on the digital interpretation of one of the monumental improvement sites at Tehidy Round. And we had already had some links as well with the Cornwall College students as well. So there's just a really nice synergy that we could see building there in terms of opportunities. So we followed that up. Reconstructions are just so important for us, trying to get the message of Cornwall's heritage across and just history and archaeology in general. Because as we all know, an image can tell a 1,000 words. It's so perfect for showing people what sites looked like in the past, for them to have that visualization. And we really like to have reconstructions on sites where they're accessible as well, if we can, so people can see these lumps and bumps that maybe they've walked through 1,000 times. But they never actually realised that maybe it was a historical site. And Tehidy Round is a perfect example of that. You can see the banks, you can see where, you know, people and dogs have been running up and down them. But do people actually know that it was maybe a 2,000-year-old settlement site? Probably not. So that's where reconstruction comes in really, really usefully for us to tell that story, give that visualization. Now, traditionally, reconstructions have always been paintings, drawings, sort of very, very static things. They can tell us an awful lot. They're really, really useful guides again. But what we're really keen to do is to move with modern technology. And obviously now with digital media, we've got so much that we can do, so much that we can present. And so you work with things like the popularity at the moment with gaming and animation online. And then we know we've got the students that are doing the course at Cornwall College at Camborne. And it's putting those two together and it's giving, for a start, those students a bit of an opportunity to try something that's a real life output, maybe looking at a different career path that they could use their qualification towards. So instead of maybe sort of doing gaming and building scenarios through that, then actually maybe they could think about doing things like historical reconstruction. To us, that is the way forward. It's bringing a really clear and a visual aspect for people to see how a site was in the past. And now, obviously, with animation, people can walk through, they can fly through a site. So it isn't just the static photo where you just say, okay, if you're standing here, this is what it would have looked like in front of you. Now you can actually walk through, you can go into huts, you can go into houses, you can hear the sounds of 2,000 years ago, you can see the animals, you can see the people, how they dressed, how the space was used. So to have the sounds and to have things like the ambient sound, like, let's face it, Cornwall with rain. We all know Cornwall rains, but you always sort of see sites and it's all nice and sunny. But if you add that sort of realistic touch of the wind, the rain, birds, again, animal sounds, maybe the sound of a forge working, maybe the sea if it's a coastal site, and it just all adds to making what people are seeing real, and it brings the past to life for them. So we're really, really keen to develop that media and to use it, and we're just so keen for students to take that forward and to see the career opportunities and to work with us as heritage professionals to develop that and to develop that way of visualisating sites. So it was great to work with Stephen and the students. The professionalism that they brought to it was just absolutely outstanding. We went to a presentation where they showed us how they'd built up the site in the past, how they'd thought about what animals would be there 2,000 years ago, what they'd look like, what the people would be wearing, what tools they'd be using, what the build of the houses would be like, even, what level of cover of trees would have been at the site at the time. So it was building as accurate a picture as you could, because that's also really important in reconstructions. We want to show people what we know from the archaeological record. We don't want to show things that was never there, or we're sort of, we're guessing too much at. It needs to be as realistic as possible so people can understand, what the site would have been like. And the output that students did was absolutely fantastic. They were even looking at things like, a cart and how a cart would have had wear and tear because it wouldn't have been pristine. It would have been reused. It would have been repaired. It would have, continued through use as a very, very important object to people at that time. So they were aging things visually, so you could see that as well, which is really, really lovely touches. So they really could see, how you represent the past to people so they'd understand it as basically looking through the lens of 2,000 years ago. So that level of understanding and professionalism and thought that they put to it was, it was really, really good to see. And as I said, the enthusiasm of some of the students was really heartwarming as well, that they'd taken this on. And the fantastic game that they did with it as well, also sort of bringing it to life, which is important because from our point of view, we're always trying to make history and archaeology accessible and interesting to the younger generations. And a very good way of doing that is obviously to turn a site, a real live site, into gameplay. They've done that fantastically. I think it will really, draw in some younger audiences to the site and to understand it. So for Tehidy Country Park itself, to have that output, to have first of all, that very real visualization of this 2,000-year-old settlement that everyone walks through, to suddenly know, actually, this is really a significant site. This is how people lived 2,000 years ago. This is what it would look like. This is maybe what it would have sounded like. So they can understand and appreciate the history, the archaeology that they're walking through. So in terms of that for interpretation, it's going to be a really great output. So through Monumental Improvement, we're going to have a display board put on the site where people can, again, they'll see the static image of, this is what you're looking at right in front of you if you would go back in time 2,000 years. But then also there'll be links then to the fly-through and all the digital media online, where, again, it'll be accessible through the website. So people can look at that and they can see the full image. They can see the full reel being played backwards to them, which, it's just great to have that out there and to start using that media, getting young people using that media and getting them interested in it. So hopefully, it just shows what we can achieve, and hopefully we can take that forward with other sites and just grow that way of visualising the past more and more and more. So it's been really exciting for us. Fantastic work from the students, a brilliant collaboration, great for the Monumental Improvement project and the Cornwall National Landscape team, and also for us as part of the Council Strategic Historic Environment team, because we go out to industry professionals to get these visualisations of the past as part of interpretation and storytelling. So to be able to do that through students and to be able to do that through such a high-tech modern medium is a really, really good result for us. So we're really pleased with everything that's happened with it and all the results from it.
Hi, I'm Stephen Howard. I'm course manager for BA Honours and a foundation degree Games Design for Industry at Cornwall College, Camborne. Yeah, the main thing about our course is we deal with a lot of client projects, which a lot of games colleges don't do. Okay, and we're very lucky that Anne came to us with this excellent brief aimed at sort of like creating an architectural visualization cinematic based on an Iron Age round situated at Tehidy Woods down in Poole. Obviously, that's a brilliant project for us. As part of doing it, obviously, we're a games course, so we wanted to create a game alongside that. It's not just a cinematic, okay, to show what the actual Tehidy Round used to look like, but also a game. And we came up with the idea of like Celts versus Romans, basically, a real big sort of hack and slash based game. It should be really good fun, probably quite gory as well, okay? So it's going to be really good fun, basically, okay? But obviously a big part of doing that was to realistically visualize the actual round there, okay? And that's probably one of the hardest things about the whole project was that really. So obviously the 3D content for that was quite hard to sort of visualize because we didn't have a lot of reference basically. All right, so the students, and you'll see in a minute, had to do a lot of work trying to find realistic imagery to enable them to like 3D model it, okay? But also as part of the sort of like brief, it was important that we sort of add sort of humans within the round to show what the actual round, what life was like actually in the round. So people like, you know, weaving baskets, working on anvils, making carts, that type of thing, basically. Make it come to life, really. That's what it's all about, and to bring it to like a younger audience, really, okay? Obviously, we need also a big part of the project was that it needed to be in keeping with the actual fauna and foliage actually at the site. Okay, so again, we'll discuss it in a minute with the students. Ian actually took us down to the site, and we spent a good 3 or 4 hours literally walking around the whole site, taking photographs, having a look at the cliff dwellings where they used to be, actually within the forest. So we got some excellent photographic reference there, video reference. And we also capture like loads of sounds as well. Okay, and he also provided us with a lot of like I think we had LiDAR footage. I think we had LiDAR footage, and we had some maps, rough maps of what the actual round looked like. Not actually looked like, but the actual sort of measurements of the place within Tehidy Woods. So that's also obviously very important for us to be able to map it out in 3D. But they also wanted, as part of the cinematic we were doing, a realistic sort of 3D render of the actual opening to the round, because what's going to happen eventually is they're going to create these great big huge sort of like perspex see-through sort of signage type things, and they're going to render like a 3D view of one of those perspex signs, so you'll be able to sort of like see through the 3D image onto the actual round and see what it actually looked like. And there'll be like a QR code at the bottom, we'll see phone up against that, and it will show sort of the animation popping up, so you'll actually be able to see what life was like 1,000 years ago or whatever it was in Iron Age times, basically. So it was a really cool brief. Okay, so a big part of this project was coming up with an effective sort of design pipeline, basically all the key stages of development. Okay, this is one of the things we get the students to do, because it's obviously a huge part of working in industry is using proper design pipelines to create a finished artifact or product or a game, basically. Okay. So we generally start off like a mind map to come up with ideas, and then something called a Gantt chart, industry standard type stuff. And we also use Hack and Plan a lot. This is used in the game industry. Basically, Hack and Plan is like a management system to assign various projects to various people and keeping track of it, basically. Okay. Obviously, a big part of this project was research. That's where Anne helped us out, Ian helped us out. Okay, and that's probably one of the most important parts of this project was sorting out the research, because it was really important that all the reference that we used was Iron Age. We had a few issues at the start where it wasn't, and we had to look very carefully at the reference to make sure that everything that students were making was actually Iron Age sort of time, basically. From then on, we generated mood boards, which is basically just like a giant post, if you like, full of all the imagery that we found to help come up with ideas for the look of the place. And then we got our concept artist to sort of like come up with Rust for actually what the round might have looked like with all the little buildings in it and people moving around and so on. Then we moved on to the level design stage. This is where Emily did a lot of her work, and she'll talk to you about that in a minute. That's basically where we design what the actual game's going to look like. Okay, where are those houses going to be? Where are the trees going to be? Where are the rooms going to be? And so on, basically. And then obviously the biggest part of the project by far is actually building all the 3D content. All right, so all like the buildings, the benches, the trees, the rocks, the foliage, a huge part of the project. Alongside that, obviously you got to texture those objects. Again, that's a big part of the project, which Emily and Ben will go into. And then obviously getting the gameplay working. Again, that's another big part of the project for the gaming specifically. Getting the guys to run around, play around with the swords, getting the AI roams to come and attack you. Again, quite a hard part of the project to develop. Lighting the project, how do we get the lighting looking correct for that part of the woods? So Emily spent quite a lot of time on that, and Chloe, we'll look at that in a minute. And then alongside, right at the end, we did quite a bit of games testing to make sure the game actually worked. And then the guys, Ben especially, you'll talk about that in a minute. We did a basic Kickstarter. So Kickstarter is still used quite a lot within the game to help promote and market various games. And they're used originally for like a lot of board game type stuff, but we still do that to help promote our games. And obviously exporting it ready for use. All right. So again, at the end, you'll see our cinematic that we created for Ian and the rest of his team.
Hi, I'm Emily Anir, and I was the team lead for the Tehidy project. So I will be going through the pre-production process of us making the game. So we first started off with the mind map. So this is the very basic planning, just getting all of our ideas into one image, and that includes things like getting all the environment stuff down and like the different types of characters that we could put into the game, different ambient types of things we could add into it. So it just gets in all of our ideas into the game that we could possibly get, and it's just collecting all of our ideas together. So as team leader, I was in charge of doing all the planning and making sure that everyone kept up with the deadlines. So for this, I made a Gantt chart for everyone to follow, and this included each of the sprints that we had to follow in order to get the full game completed. And this included all the different areas that were needed in order to get the game completed as well. So that included things like 3D modeling, creations, and getting all the concept art and things like that done on time so everyone can use it correctly, and it just really helped with the flow of the development. So then we had all the different mood boards. This really does help with our development just because we all get a very good idea of what things can look like and just get a really good general idea of how people might have lived back then. So we've done a few different mood boards. So environment one, just to help us understand what the area would have looked like back then. We also did a character mood board just to see how people would have looked, what their clothes would have been like, and just how they would have lived. So this also includes both Celtic and Roman characters. And then we have a roundhouse mood board. This one was very important as we were focusing on the settlement itself. So getting the rounds perfect was very important. And an asset mood board, which again was very important as we were focusing on the settlement. So we needed to make sure that everything in the settlement was as realistic and factually accurate as possible.
Okay, once a lot of the pre-production is finished, things like the mood boards, the Gantt charts, some of the concept work, we get the shoots to do a little bit of experimentation on their specific specialisms before we sort of jump into the main project. Chloe Turner, she was, along with Emily, was responsible for doing a lot of the actual world building of the site, the Iron Age round site. And she initially we use Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine is huge, especially Unreal Engine 5 at the moment. It's used a lot in the film industry. It's called virtual production. A lot of Netflix TV shows and Hollywood films are now starting to use Unreal Engine for their backdrops rather than using green screening. They're actually using game engines to create a lot of the backgrounds. So things like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mandalorian, that type of show is now using Unreal Engine heavily in their production. So obviously we do go into a little bit about that, okay, but we had to experiment a lot in Unreal Engine to start off with to figure out how we could best create the landscape to reflect the Tehidy Round, basically. We initially started looking at something called megascans, Quixel megascans, which is like a huge like resource of like 3D imagery. It's been scanned by 3D scanners basically, and it's sort of super realistic. So it's got all the realistic textures in there. It's got millions of polygons, so it's ultra realistic, and that's why Hollywood uses it basically. So we use it as well. Again, it's used a lot heavily in architectural visualization, which is obviously we're creating a cinematic to help promote the site. So we thought we might as well use that as well, and it saves a lot of time when placing assets basically. But there's a skill to it. You can't just plonk them in. You need to understand how to like get the texture right and the lighting right and so on before you use them, really. Along with creating the landscape, I think Emily was involved with this. We used LiDAR footage and Google Earth, Google Maps, that type of stuff to get a realistic view of what the actual Tehidy site looked like from above, basically, to enable us, and Emily specifically, to accurately place rocks and foliage and things like that, basically. But obviously, because of the era it was set in, it was like thousands of years ago, we couldn't put all the forest in there because that was all added later on by the various families that lived there. So we had to take a lot of the forest away and add rocks and stuff, basically. And then sort of figure out how do we actually get the foliage in there. Okay, so again, Chloe and Emily, something they did for the actual BA is to figure out how do we get a serious amount of foliage in there and make it look accurate. All right, and this is where their experimentations in Unreal started, basically using like foliage tools, megascans, and so on to get really accurate looking fauna, stuff like that. Basically, where the actual trees go. What were the actual trees around then? What were the actual animals? What were the actual plants around in that area? So they had to do a lot of research in relation to that to figure out, are the plants they actually putting in there relevant to that time period? Alongside that, like I said, we had to really accommodate Ian and Anne's maps of the Iron Age round to make it look like it is a realistic round, i.e. it wasn't circular, it's actually rectangular with like sort of rounded edges. So that was quite important. We actually did that. Initially I just thought it was literally round, but it's not. It's like a square with round edges. So it's important when we did the block out, i.e. putting the basic shapes of the round into Unreal, that we got that right. Alongside that, the textures are really important as well. Okay, getting the rocks looking right, getting the powers looking right, making it look wet, dry, lumpy, or whatever. So the students spent a lot of time experimenting with how to get the materials right. And obviously, a big part of the block out is making sure that all the 3D content is consistent in the way that it actually looks, the scale of it, the actual texture of it, the lighting of it. So again, Emily and Ben will talk to you about that. How do we make sure that all the 3D content was consistent? That's really important, because initially at the start we did have one or two objects in there that weren't Iron Age, and we had to be very sort of like anal about it, making sure that that all the content in there was actually Iron Age, otherwise it'll stand out a mile, basically.
Okay, so other than being the team leader for this project, I was also a big I did a big part on the world building as well. So I started off looking at things like procedural world generation. So that is looking at making sure that all the plants and things are really evenly distributed around the world and making it look as realistic and natural as I possibly could. So I did a big part of doing that. I also went back to looking at quite basic things as well. So looking at different types of plants that we could get into the game, whilst also looking at the footage and things that we got whilst we were at the site as well. So comparing the different plants to the plants there, to the plants that we had available to use. I also had another look at landscaping, so making sure that the landscape looked as realistic as I possibly could. Something else I did took a big part in was getting the water right. So water is a very big important thing to life. So making sure that was done well was really important to get right. I looked at different things like water physics and just making sure that water looked natural. So to experiment with the water quite a bit and with the procedural foliage, I made a few scenes just to make sure that I could get what I had learned done correctly and put into the game properly. So I just did a few tests to see if I could get it right. So something else that we had to make sure was done correctly was the landscape itself. So as we were recreating an actual place, we had a look at, I think, websites like Google Earth and Google Maps just to get a really solid idea of what the area looked like. And we literally got an image from Google Maps to use as a height map for Unreal Engine, just so that we could get it as precise as we possibly could. I also did a detailed block out for the round itself and for the hill fort, just so that we could get the exact sizes and placements of each of the buildings, and just making sure that they are a good distance from each other. So I also went into doing things like texturing of the landscape and looking at weather systems for the game and cinematic, and looking at lighting for it as well, because that is a very important thing to get right. And being in Cornwall, there's a lot of rain, so we also wanted to get that into the game as well. So I started looking at building and placing assets that people had already done. So getting in things like the roundhouses and the animals and all the smaller assets into the game, into the buildings and outside the buildings as well, and making sure that everything is placed logically but still messily, and to make sure that they looked used. I also went into looking at the particle effects. So particles are quite good at making something look atmospheric and ambient, so I did a big part in that as well. So as the development progressed, we added a lot more assets and things into the game. So this included lots of foliage and getting all of the assets in place and making sure that everything was perfect. Being in a wooded area, we needed to make sure that all of the trees were in place and all the rocks and all of the environmental assets of the world. So that meant that getting in all of the procedural foliage in place, making sure that everything was as realistic as we possibly could, and all whilst looking at references and anything that the client had sent to us. So when it came to the game, we wanted to do a hack and slash. So one thing that I also did towards that was creating the model for the Roman. So for this, I looked at loads of different reference images and just making sure that everything on the model looked as normal as I possibly could in regards to how they would have looked like back then. So getting their armor and their just general appearance in place. And once I was happy with all the placements of the assets, I got in the particle effects. So this included things like flies and fire into the little campfire areas. And once we got to the end of the project, I made sure that all the lighting was in place, made sure that it was a realistic atmosphere for the cinematic, because that was really important to get right. And just making sure that everything was up to standard for the client, and removing anything that needed to be removed, adding anything that needed to be added, and making sure that it was as best quality as possible. And just adding a few extra details, like adding in water into containers, just making sure that the flooring of the round itself was realistic and muddy and well used and lived in, making sure that the mound around the cinematic looked like it had been used as well, because that's also a very big part of the settlement itself. So adding in lots of logs and rocks into that as well.
Okay, running alongside the environmental artwork and the 3D content, we had our concept team working on like the concepts of what the actual round would look like, what the weapons might look like, and especially what the characters would look like. Also, we had no idea what the people looked like then, so we looked at like a lot of like reenactment sites, that type of thing, TV programs. There was an old Iron Age TV show in the 70s that came out about families living in Iron Age times, so we used a lot of reference from that, which was really good. Okay, and then Cameron put together some concepts of what the actual characters might look like. And he spent quite a lot of time drawing rough assets for those, and then he moved into Photoshop and did some really sort of nice detailed concepts of what the basic Iron Age characters might look like. He did a lot of like sort of like 2D artwork in relation to that, looking at various clothes he wore, the different colours that might have worn, woven outfits, wool outfits, and so on, basically. And then he generated some 3D templates to enable him to create like a base 3D character to work from. He spent a lot of time trying to get the clothing right. That's quite a difficult thing to do, clothing in 3D. There's lots of programs out there that help you do that. We wanted to do it all in 3D Max, which is great. Obviously, a big part of doing that work is paying very close attention to the actual concepts that were created by him and other people, and also any imagery we found up by the movie boards. He spent quite a lot of time to get that right, because it's quite important, because the characters are a big part of obviously the cinematic and a huge part of the game. Again, alongside doing the character concepts, like I said, the Iron Age round concepts are really important as well. What do the actual rounds look like? What do the actual buildings within the round houses look like? Again, we had no real reference for that really, apart from, like I said, TV shows from the 70s, some reenactment sites, some Iron Age rounds around the country that have already been rebuilt. We have some information from them, and obviously any information that Ian and Anne provided us with. We got hold of a couple of books via them that showed sort of like artistic impressions of what the characters look like, and also the buildings themselves, the actual roundhouses. And these are like really invaluable because we really wanted to get those buildings right. Especially the interiors. You know, one thing I thought was really important about doing the cinematic and especially the game was making sure the actual site looked like it was actually lived in. We didn't want it looking perfect. Okay, really hard edges. You know, that's what spoils a lot of like architectural visualization. They make it look way too nice. Okay, so I made it a point of telling the students that we wanted it roughed up, wanted it to look properly lived in. Pans everywhere, planks everywhere, broken wheels all over the place, clothes hanging up, soggy mud, spears hanging up, proper lived in sort of architecture, if you like. Okay. Once we got a few of those concepts out of the way, we started to play around with some of the basic mechanics. We looked at how to get basic AI, so get some of the characters to walk around, some of the animals walking around. That was quite important. And again, experimenting with the actual look of the buildings. We're actually in 3D now. So once we got a lot of the concepts out of the way, start getting the students and the 3D team to mock up what the actual roundhouse might look like. Various assets like anvils, sickles, furniture, all that type of stuff, fences and so on. And again, alongside this, the students were learning software like 3D Max, Substance Painter and so on. Again, industry standard stuff, basically, okay? And a big part of the course is learning industry standard software. So getting briefs like this is brilliant, because it enables them to put into practice what they learn with me and the rest of the team, basically. And again, how to dirty things up. Again, one of the things that students do have a tendency to do is make their 3D models too nice, okay? And what I try to bang into them, and they'll tell you this, okay, is, you know, all objects have got a narrative. You know, when you use a camera or a hammer and sickle or a lathe or whatever, okay, it has wear and tear on it, okay? And it's important that when you're making your 3D models and you texture it, you put on that wear and tear to make it look realistic. And that's something we really sort of drill into the students, is how to do that, basically. Okay. Rebecca Mullen, she's an awesome concept artist. She did a lot of the concepts for the various buildings, the animals and so on. Again, and she worked great on the 3D team. She did lots of the animals, the pigs and the horses and so on. And you might think just modelling a pig or a horse would be quite easy. It's not, especially when, you know, in those days, from what we found out from Anne and Ian, they were slightly smaller than what they are now, and the colours were different. They're sort of very sort of generic looking pigs and horses, you know, so you had to do a lot of reference to figure out, you know, what the pig from the Iron Age actually looks like. From what we know, they're a lot smaller, basically, and they look a lot more like boars rather than what you see nowadays. Rebecca did loads of concept artwork, and she did a lot of the 3D content modeling things like spears, characters, shields, and so on. And then Kelly, again, was one of our main concept artists. She also worked alongside Kelly and Cameron, coming up with the concept art for a lot of the buildings and the clothing and so on, basically. Obviously, the concept art's very, very important, because if you think about it, there's not a lot of photography around of the Iron Age times. Okay, so nearly all of the concepts were like hand-drawn, so we have some idea of what we're actually going to produce, because we didn't have any photographic evidence of what it actually looked like then. All right, so the concept artist had a big role to play. And like any sort of studio in the gaming world, that the concept was really important, and then to knock it out really quickly, within like 3 or 4 weeks, basically, so the 3D artists could crack on and get it done. After we got a lot of the concept art done, it's the 3D artist team, or sort of the 3D team, that envisaged that work within the game, basically. And what I mean is they'll start to come up with like basic prototypes of the various assets. Okay, and it'll be up to Emily and Chloe and Ben to do all that sort of work, and Emily would monitor the quality of it to make sure it's all consistent. Okay, also I played a little bit of a part in that, making sure that, like I said, the narrative of the assets was important. As it got wear and tear on it, does it look banged up? Does it look handmade? Initially, some of the furniture the students made look very sort of square and boxy, and it looked like it'd been made with modern day saws and drills and things like that, which wasn't in keeping with the time. So I had to make sure that they roughed those edges up to make them look like they've been hand planed or used axes to make them, basically. So it was in keeping with the time and the era and the tools available at that time. Alongside actual making cinematic, which is all about creating like an architectural visualization of what the actual round looked like, obviously we were making a game alongside that. So in keeping with that, we have to create the proper documentation to enable that to happen. Okay, so there's basically 2 documents you normally make, something called a high-pitch document and also a game design document. These 2 are like really big documents that help the team come up with like the mechanics, the look, the narrative, and the whole aspect of what the game's about, basically. But it's also used in industry to help market the game. So if you were to go to like a game design publisher or a marketing team, or even a bank for that matter, okay, you need those pieces of paper to show them what your game's about, so you can get the money to actually make it, basically. So they're really important documents, and it's a big part of game design that you understand how to do that. So this project was perfect to give those guys a good idea of how to do that, basically. Once we've done a lot of the 3D content, okay, we moved on to actual gameplay mechanics, the actual coding side of it. Okay, and we had 2 or 3 people working on that. Again, it's a big part of the game, not necessarily a big part of cinematic, but a big part of the gaming process. Again, we use Unreal Engine blueprinting for that, and it's quite a complicated process. Again, you have to figure out all the gameplay before you actually do it. Okay, and then we'll get a small team of people working on maybe like say a night-day system. We'll get people working on the AI, i.e. getting the characters running around, chasing after you, and so on. We'd have systems for creating foliage, systems for creating rivers and water and all that sort of stuff, basically. We had like a small team of coders generating all the code for mechanics of the game. Things like I said, the AI, getting the characters running around, water systems, enemies fighting sequences, scoring, health, and so on, basically. So we had to do a lot of experimentation in relation to getting that work within the game.
I'm Ben Jones, and I'm the 3D team lead for the project. My role basically made it so that I, kind of like Emily, I was to keep check on the 3D team, keep track of what work they were doing, making sure it was up to standard, and to make sure there were no problems with it before we sent it off to our world building team to be implemented. I started off this project by creating my own personal mood board and mind map, going through kind of what assets and things we can be expected to create for the project. Finding kind of references for these would be a lot more difficult than maybe your average project, because since we're going from a time period where things aren't well documented and there isn't much evidence for, it was a bit difficult to find concrete lists of things that would be around. So after getting myself familiar with things I would be looking for, I started off with making an asset list for the 3D team to kind of go off things. Whilst going through and creating the asset list, I also tried to include as many pictures as I could for reference. This would save time for the team, because they wouldn't have to go and find references on their own, and it would allow them to get a quick idea of what they need to build and what kind of how it should look. after that, we went through a kind of an early modeling stage where it's like we had some rough kind of model concepts, just kind of get back into the swing of making models. These models were they're not super realistic. They're more so just kind of, this is how it should look in kind of a very basic term, but this is what we need to do to get it looking really realistic. So after we went through those couple phases and like early textures that didn't have much detail and they kind of looked like just a PNG slapped on a model, we started using Substance Painter to kind of get that really high detail texturing in, where we could get things like grime, dirt, mold, scratches, and then we would kind of go off of what like materials our models would be made out of. So for example, like we had a shield that had like some very odd looking patterns on it. So when I was making that model, I actually used Photoshop to get a proper image of like one of the shields that had been found at a site or something similar to. So then we would get that pattern off that image, and then we would try our best to kind of implement it onto the shield. When thinking about adding like wear and tear and that to the models, there were many different ways we went about doing it. Like one of them would be like adding extra cuts into the model so that we could make like little either dents into a model, kind of chips in like something like a blade, just things like that. For kind of scratches and that, we would actually take a look at how these tools and assets would actually be held so that we could get it more accurate looking, because you can't just have scratches anywhere on a model. It wouldn't look right. Another thing I had to keep track of with all these models is to make sure their polygon counts weren't getting too high, as since we would be adding a lot of models to our kind of game world and all of that, if we had too many models with too many polygons, it would start to affect kind of how efficiently the game would load, run, and it would make kind of the specs required to run it a lot more higher, which would mean a lot less people would be able to either view our kind of cinematics in a good quality, or they wouldn't be able to play our game without having a good high-end PC.
Okay, so after all that hard work, we virtually complete the game and the game prototype, and we complete the cinematic. So initially, one of the things that Anne insisted upon, and Ian as well, was the actual cinematic actually starts where the opening of the round actually is situated in Tehidy Woods. So we spent a lot of time, well, Emily and I didn't, Emily spent a lot of time getting the look of that correct. Okay, so making sure like we said, we didn't have too many trees, for example. We didn't have too many rocks. It actually looks like what it might have looked like then. Okay, so that was really important. We got that right. So that's where the animation starts, basically. So what you do is you got a really nice sort of fly through into the actual camp, if you like, the actual round, through some great big gates, and then you get a really good sort of fly around of what the actual buildings look like. As part of flying the round through the rounds of the buildings, we've got people sort of walking around and working on making baskets and so on. You can walk into the buildings, actually see what the actual round buildings look like. Again, a big part of what Emily did, Chloe and the rest of the team did, was to make those buildings actually look like that they've been lived in, and that's quite important. And again, dirtying things up, not too many hard 3D edges, basically. Make it look dirty, roughed up, handmade is really, really important. And again, one thing about cinematic is, and again, what Ian and wanted was to get that realistic Iron Age look, and making sure the equipment, all the tools, all the furniture was in keeping with all the reference that we had, basically, and that was known of at that time, really. Okay, so that's really important. And we didn't want the place looking too nice. Okay, the outside, the exterior, lumps, bumps, rotting flesh, maybe sometimes from pigs. Okay, twigs, mud, dirt, proper lived-in environment. Okay, as part of the cinematic, it's also important to sort of show the like Peninsula Fort, I think it was called. This is sort of like an Alamo to the Celts, basically, at the Tehidy site. So when the Romans did attack, they had somewhere to run to and sort of last stand, basically. And this is what the last part cinematic that we created was that sort of like Alamo, if you like, the runaway, the hideaway place, basically, right on the end of the peninsula. And we actually went there and filmed the actual place. So everything that Emily built and the rest of the team built is relevant to the actual footage, and it's in keeping with the footage, which is really good. Also, there was a great big sort of like, I don't know what you call it, sort of like a channel around the actual peninsula there. Look, it's like, and they're like spiky fences there. So if the Romans did attack, they could defend that really, really well, basically. Okay, they could throw stones and spears and rocks at them, basically, and get them trapped in that little valley, basically. Okay. And we created some nice sort of like fake sort of like drone footage of that whole area within the cinematic, so you could see what the actual round looked like in keeping with the whole Tehidy Woods.
Okay, so something that I was in charge of was sorting out the cinematic for the client itself, and I wanted to include as many of the things that they wanted as possible. And so that started off looking at the front gate of the round itself, as that was going to be one of the biggest areas that the client wanted. So I really just wanted to get in a really good zoom in on that entrance, adding in as much detail as I possibly could into that one shot, and just adding in as many smaller areas into the cinematic. So looking inside the roundhouses themselves, just so that people could see what was possibly inside the rounds. That would be very important to see, and looking into the different types of buildings as well. So looking inside the blacksmith building and the storage room, that would also help the viewer to see what is inside the roundhouses. So we did a few more shots outside, and just to get in the smaller details really close up, and a few further away as well. So we did a few different camera angles just to get as much detail into the cinematic as we possibly could. So we also looked at the hill fort as well at the peninsula, as this was another thing that we wanted to look at for the project, as this was another big area for the Iron Age people. So we also did a big look at that as well. And then we just went back to the round itself, just getting some more broader camera shots of that area, just to give a really big, wide view of it. So what I got out of the project was just really refining my skills in level design and project management. So being team leader, I had a huge role in the project. So I need to make sure that everything was done on time, up to standard, and good for the client. So for the world building, I hadn't really focused on it much in the past, but I really think that working on it has helped me a great deal with understanding how it works and the process of doing it, and just getting everything in place and looking as realistic and natural as I possibly could.
So after the project was finished, we had a lot of people view the cinematic. Ian kindly, I put it on YouTube, and Ian gave that link to a lot of people. And a lot of people saw it and they were blown away. You know, I was blown away about it, but, you know, it's nice to see that actual people in the industry are actually blown away by the student efforts. So much so, we've had another National Heritage Site come and talk to us, and they're going to hopefully send the students more what to do next year, which is fantastic. You know, that shows how good students' work is on the course, hopefully. We've also got other work coming in from other companies that have looked at the cinematic. And we had great feedback from Anne about what the quality of student work, saying that she actually showed it to other architectural visualization companies, you know, proper studios, and they were blown away by the quality of the work. Yeah, so you can't ask for any better endorsement than that, really. So I'm really chuffed to bits with what the students have done and all the responses that we've had from the clients and the industry. So we might ask, you know, what the students got out of this. Basically, they worked on a live client brief, and that's really, really important. Okay, most games courses throughout the country don't work on live client briefs, and we do. It's a big USP of our course, basically, down at Camborne. And obviously, working on live client briefs, it's totally different to working on like a college brief, if you like, in relation to working to like proper deadlines, and the client is coming every couple of weeks to see what you're doing and make sure you get it right. The students don't always like it. They might have to change something here or there, or change a bit of 3D, or change a bit of the text or whatever. But it's invaluable experience. It's you can't beat it really. Okay. And obviously, a big part of working with the client is you need to understand and learn how to actually talk to a client and present your work. So the students have to regularly present their work to the client, talk their way through it like they're doing today. Okay, but it's quite nerve-wracking when you actually do it with the client sat in front of you. So it's great for industry experience when you have to do it in the real world of like presenting your game, presenting your idea, your pitch, and all that sort of stuff. It's an invaluable experience for that sort of thing, really. Okay, probably the biggest thing they got out of it was using their actual skills, their specialist skills within a project, within a real life project. Okay, and like I said before, it's one thing doing it as a college project, but when you're doing it for like a real project, the bar is set a lot higher. All right, and I set it high as well myself, and they'll tell you that. But it's a way of challenging their abilities to the utmost to produce portfolio and show real ready work to get them a job at the end of the day, basically.
As for what I got out of this project, I would say it's definitely given me a good experience on how to make realistic looking models, what would be expected from me out of a real games company. And it's also helped me find a good passion for making models.